So there are two types of sampling methods. There is probability sampling, sampling that involves selection of a statistical random basis or based on a probability theory. In this case, we are looking at maybe having a statistical formula, something to help you pick your sample or a guidance. And then we also have non-probability sampling, which involves non-random selection without any predefined procedure, maybe or even a formula. So today we are concentrating on probability sampling, which involves use of a systematic selection of your sample from a population. And then in the other session, that's when we are going to look at non-probability sampling. So ensure that you subscribe to the channel so that you get the notification for the other recording. Hello researchers, my name is Malcolm Shambana, and today we are looking at sampling. Specifically, we are looking at probability sampling, which is one of the key areas or key activities in every research. There is also non-probability sampling, which will be handled in the next session. So you need to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can get the notification for the next session. In Zambia today, it's very cold. So if you are here in Zambia, you can make your coffee, make your tea, relax, and enjoy the session. Thank you. Like I said, my name is Malcolm Shambana. You can reach me via WhatsApp on +260 977 488 442. You might as well subscribe to my YouTube channel. There are several videos there. And once you subscribe, you'll be getting notifications whenever there is a new video. You might as well like the videos so that other or your colleagues may see the videos. So today, our learning objectives are to understand what sampling is, to understand the purpose of sampling, to understand the sampling methods, to differentiate between probability and non-probability sampling, and also to understand the types of probability sampling. Like I said, today we're just looking at probability sampling. Non-probability sampling will be covered in the other session. So what is sampling? Sampling is the selection of a smaller group from a bigger group in a research. In this case, we are looking at the smaller group being known as the sample and the bigger group being known as the population. The purpose of sampling is quite straightforward, is to approximate the characteristics in relation to the research question about a larger group. Why I've used the words research question? Because in our case, we are looking at sampling in your research, your dissertation, or your thesis. So you want to draw inference from a smaller group to a bigger group. You want to draw characteristics, you want to analyze characteristics of a bigger group by using a smaller group. There are several reasons why you have to do that. One is to make your group manageable size. Imagine if you had to research on university students in Zambia. I think there are about now 52 to 60 universities in Zambia. If you want to know the characteristics of students, particular characteristics of students, you wouldn't manage to go through all the 60 plus universities in Zambia, but you would pick a smaller group and extend your finding to the bigger group. That's what sampling is all about. This group is manageable. And on top of that, it saves you on costs. Imagine if you had to move around the country, maybe to assess voting patterns in Zambia or predict how people are going to vote in the next election, and to say we have got over 5 million voters in Zambia. You wouldn't interview all those 5 million voters. Instead, you would pick a smaller group, provided it's representative of the population. And from there, you can pick the pattern and project who the voters are likely to vote for. It also saves your time. You wouldn't waste so much time. For example, if you had to assess behavior of all the Zambians in terms of, for example, alcohol consumption, you wouldn't look at the entire population or the entire adult population. You would instead sample a few. Because once you go that route of looking at the entire population, you might not even meet your target. You might not finish your research. There is no time for such a big population. Unless the population is very small, that's when you can go ahead with picking the entire population. But otherwise, that's the main reason why we sample. These are the main reason why we sample, to have a manageable size, save on cost, and save on time. We come to sampling methods. There are two types of sampling methods. We have probability sampling, and this is sampling that involves selection of a statistical random basis, or based on a probability theory. So in this case, there is a formula, statistical formula, on which you are going to base your sampling on. There might be also maybe a probability theory. There is a prescribed guideline on how you are going to do your sampling. And then we also have non-probability sampling, which involves non-random selection without a predefined procedure. Here, in this case, there is no predefined procedure or formula, but it's just a non-random selection where the researcher is the one who decides who they are going to interview, or what their sample is going to be. In our session today, we are only looking at probability sampling. Non-probability sampling will be handled in the next session. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you get notification of once the video is done for non-random sampling. Probability sampling. There are four main types of probability sampling. We have simple random sampling, we have systematic sampling, we have stratified random sampling, we also have cluster sampling. Simple random sampling. This involves random selection of a sample from a population, with each member of the population having an equal chance of being selected. In this case, you're picking at random without even knowing which member you are going to pick. It's like picking the balls from the lotto pot. You don't know which number you are going to pick. This is the same system, which is known as the simple random sampling. In our case, we can have a population, and we can code the population, giving each member a code or a number, and then those numbers are random selected. Random picked, usually there are now softwares which can help you randomly pick numbers. Even in Excel, there is a way you can random pick numbers. There are schedules, random schedules for picking numbers. Then once those numbers are picked randomly, then that member is the one who's selected as a sample. If that member's number is picked, then that member is part of the sample. So initially you start by coding the members. If there is Chanda, Bwaria, Lombe, those are Zambian names. You say Lombe is number 1, Chanda number 2, Bwaria number 3. Then you make a pot of those numbers, then pick them randomly. If it picks 3, which is attached to Bwaria, then Bwaria is picked as a sample. That's how simple random, that's why I think they even call it simple random, is done. It's very simple and straightforward, and they must be the oldest way of sampling, I guess. There are advantages and disadvantages of every method of sampling, and for simple random sampling, the advantages are that it's cheap, it's easy, like I've stated there, is to implement. The disadvantages are it ignores the minority subgroup. You might have, say, for example, in a group, in a classroom, you have 80% boys and 20% girls. Once you use random sampling, you might pick, there's a high chance that you might pick boys, only boys in your sample because of the high population ratio of boys. So that's one of the disadvantage. It may ignore minority subgroup. And since we were talking about listing, it may be very difficult to find a list of the members of group where you are supposed to do the coding, where you are supposed to attach numbers. It may be very difficult. You might not know their names. So the coding will be very difficult for you. That's one of the disadvantages. So please take note when you're choosing your sampling method, you should take note of these cases. Then we have systematic random sampling. This is a sampling which involves selection of a sample from members of a larger population according to a random starting point, but with a fixed periodic interval. What we mean by this is that there is an interval which has to be set upon which every sample is picked. The interval is computed by dividing the population by the desired sample size. So let me show you the example. In our case here, we have, for example, a population of 100. If our desired sample size is 10, then our interval will be 10. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So at every 10th member of the population will be picked as a sample, depending on your starting point. Definitely, your starting point has to be random. Systematic random sampling, in our case, for example, we have a population. Then we go through the same route of coding, just the same way we did for simple random sampling. But instead of picking the sample randomly right there and then, we decide the interval at which we have to pick our sample. And that's why it's even called systematic random sampling. So from the intervals, the sample is picked. This is more like a simple random sampling, but it is systematic in which the sample is chosen. There are several, as usual, advantages and disadvantages of systematic random sampling. Advantages are that it's cheap, just like simple random sampling, and it's easy to understand. You know where you are picking the sample from because of the interval which you have already computed. Disadvantages are it ignores the minority subgroupings, just the same as what we had discussed under simple random sampling. And also, if the population size is unknown, it's very difficult for you to determine now the interval. Those are the two advantages. There are several which you can pick from there. Those are just examples which I can give us for now. Then we have stratified sampling. Stratified sampling involves dividing members of a population into subgroups called strata based on the characteristics that they share, e.g., race, gender, or education attainment. Then randomly picking samples from each group using respective probabilities. In our case, we can have a grouping, which is a population with several different types of characteristics. I wouldn't say, okay, let me just say even racial. They are blue, red, black. So from there, from that population, you are able to now strata, put them into their respective groupings. We have red, we have black, we have blue. That's called a strata. And then from those stratas, respectively, you pick samples. And when picking samples, you can use simple random sampling or systematic random sampling. Those two earlier discussed sampling systems. That's why I mentioned earlier on that these sampling methods can be used as to complement or supplement each other. This is a good example I've given here. Once picking, you may decide maybe you use a simple or systematic, but this is a stratified sampling method. From there, your samples are picked from each grouping. We have our sample there. Stratified, as usual, like any other sampling method, has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it's accurate. You are going to look at the features of also subgroups within the population. That's how accurate stratified can get. The disadvantage is that it may be difficult to identify subgroups. There are some groupings which you may not know as a researcher, and it might give you a challenge when using this method to sample your sample. Then we come to cluster sampling. This is the last but not the least. Cluster sampling involves dividing the population into smaller groups known as clusters. Then clusters are randomly picked to form samples. The clusters usually it's based on a geographical location. So I'll also give a geographical related example. So in our case, we can have a cluster, maybe from Western Province in Zambia. We have we have Lusaka Province. Those provinces are from Zambia. Then we have Central Province and Luapula Province. These provinces are clusters. Now, when you are carrying out your sample selection. You cannot cover all the provinces, the entire population target, for example. But you can choose either one or two clusters. In our case, I chose two clusters. That's Lusaka province and Central province. These are our sampled clusters. They are known as sampled clusters. Then from our sampled clusters, you can now choose your sample from each cluster. If your sample size, your target is say 12, you can choose 6 from each. And if we had selected one cluster, say Lusaka, we could have chosen 12, the entire 12 from Lusaka, and that would have been our sample. So the heading is wrong there, but it's supposed to read clustered sampling. The advantages is that it's easy to implement, it's efficient. The disadvantage are that it is inaccurate because you have left out other clusters which may have different characteristics from the selected clusters. That's one of the disadvantages. Forget about the heading there. It's actually supposed to read clustered sampling. So, when selecting, the key issue is that you need to know your sample. You need to understand your sample, know the advantages and disadvantages when choosing your sampling method. So, our next session, we'll discuss non-probability distribution. So remember to subscribe to the channel there. I'm sure you're watching it on YouTube so that you can get the notification of the next recording. Thank you for having time to listen to this session. God bless you.